As we start to step into our regular schedule for what was this week before the rookies report to training camp on Friday, and obviously the veterans subsequently report on Tuesday, Brown's defensive line, defensive end position, defensive tackle position. Brown showed a lot of faith here that I think some of us probably weren't anticipating in a certain young defensive end. These are all things we're going to break down. Browns 3D on the OBR begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd, and we appreciate everybody who comes to the OBR for their favorite Cleveland Browns content day in, day out. Everybody who joins us every evening here on the OBR streaming network beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday, you will have the React following at 7 o'clock. You will have very special Garage Beers with Mike Keefe at 9 o'clock. If you are a Columbus Blue Jackets fan, I suggest you highly stick around after the React for Mike Keefe's episode of Garage Beers. As always, make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on YouTube. Of course, make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. And to all our subscribers here at the OBR, we greatly appreciate you. And if you are not there yet, I suggest you change your mind and go ahead and subscribe and get yourself into that insider package and it's the time of the year. You want to be there, guys. Yes, I'm being a company man, but there's stuff in there that you will have well before your friends do. Now, the Browns' defensive line, and I think I really like where this is potentially headed for the Cleveland Browns. And for somebody like me, who the Cleveland Browns have been a main focus of theirs since the early days of the 2017 season. The Browns, and I screamed about it for years, it never seemed like there was this huge investment, commitment of taking the defensive line as a whole, interior, and of course the edge rushers, and prioritizing these groups. And it always seemed kind of like a mismatched plan. Obviously, my time covering the Cleveland Browns is the entirety of Myles Garrett's time. But it was always interesting how they handled the rest of the defensive line. There were some gambles on young players, usually not high investments. There were times this team, it just felt like, they just weren't necessarily prioritizing, maybe even ignoring at times. And this maybe hasn't been so much in the Berry administration, but certainly 17, 18, 19, plenty of times where I just, why does this team not value defensive tackle the way other franchises do? And then with Berry and Stefanski, I would say there was value there, but more often than not, it was, temporary. The investment wasn't there draft wise in younger players who could ultimately develop, sign a second contract, and talking about guys here 5, 6, 7 seasons. I think the way the rooms are built now, I think you have a better opportunity of reaching that. I think, the potential certainly on the interior at the defensive tackle position, in my opinion, this is the way it should be. And I guess if you want, we'll get to the defensive tackles, but I certainly do want to probably start here, of course, on the outside with the edge rushers. Look, it all begins and ends. It all starts when we're talking about the Cleveland Browns defensive line as far as, headliner. Of course, number 95, Canton Pro Football Hall of Famer to be Myles Garrett. Certainly, the way the season ended in 2024, and for a player like Myles, who I don't know the correct way to describe this, but it just seemed like, that Myles, of course, obviously was the best player on this team for an extremely long time. And now as Myles has matured and aged, becoming more the face of this franchise and, becoming a paramount leader of this team and, one of the people that is expected to speak, at every opportunity. May not have been the best thing as 2024 was ending, of course, as, Myles Garrett obviously was expressing his frustrations with this franchise. And within his speaking, obviously, was, the feel of the room, the feel of his teammates, and the overall frustration of the team as far as how the team was performing. And, a lot of people wondering what exactly the future was for the Cleveland Browns. And we all know how it worked with Myles to the point where, Myles probably was a 3-week time where if you put a microphone in Myles Garrett's in front of Myles Garrett and asked him about the Cleveland Browns, he voiced his frustrations, and as we all know, voiced that there may have been a desire to leave the Cleveland Browns. It would have never worked. There was no way to even speculate, put together, use Madden to try to find a way that a trade would work for the Cleveland Browns. It would have absolutely just nuked the financials, the salary cap. So, I know all of us here at the OBR, we were pretty steadfast on it and just tried to tell everybody at every turn it's not going to happen. And it wasn't so much that you know, it was that it was not going to happen because it couldn't happen, because that's what it would have done to the entire plan, the entire roster, all the salary cap. It was basically, just setting everything ablaze and hoping insurance was going to come in and write you a big fat check. Once the dust settled, as we all know, right before the league year began was a Sunday. The Cleveland Browns and Myles Garrett reached agreement on Myles' second contract extension with the Cleveland Browns. Once again, making him a very, very wealthy man, one of the top paid players in the NFL, and he's absolutely deserving of it. But to think that these frustrations that Myles showed us last year are all of a sudden, going to go away with money, it's a nice thought to have. But if this team does not look convincingly better on both sides of the ball, and the belief within certainly Garrett, the roster, the locker room, that better times are coming and they're coming quicker than later is huge. And we all know what we have in Myles Garrett. And I think, although I've been following, I've been, covering this team now for 9 years. And obviously some of you people have, been with this franchise your entire life, 2, 3, 4 decades, whatever that may be. It's easy to get for me just in the 9 years. Because here it is, you have this player in Myles Garrett. First ballot Hall of Famer. One of the best to ever do it, not only for the Cleveland Browns, but one of the best to ever do it within the NFL. And although it's never guaranteed, I think everybody wants to see the star of their franchise get the opportunity to play in bigger, if not the biggest, game in the sport. And that's certainly, I think, something that is, as Myles is where he is now at his age, certainly has made a significant amount of money. This is probably the only thing missing from his legacy is, team success, Myles getting to perform in the biggest moments. Still the best player on this roster. But certainly where Myles is with this defensive line currently, and certainly where this defensive line could be in a year or two. One of the things that truly shocked me about the offseason and certainly the draft. And there was this talk, certainly, and a lot of talk, about the Browns' possible interest when they held the number 2 selection of Travis Hunter and, of course, Abdul Carter. And I'm not going to sit here anymore and, clamor about Abdul Carter. But the thing for me is if you had, you know, serious interest, and it could have been Hunter, and certainly it probably was Carter at time. There were dalliances for both of them. That if you were truly interested in Abdul Carter that high in the draft, obviously you felt that way about the defensive end position. But the Cleveland Browns never did that. The Cleveland Browns didn't go that route. You signed Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, 1 year, $4 million. And, that is not a move that was ever going to take you away from drafting Abdul Carter. And I never felt that was a move that was going to stop you from taking a defensive end in the draft at any point. I didn't think you would just end up not drafting a defensive end, which is exactly what the Cleveland Browns did do. They did not draft a defensive end. The Cleveland Browns not drafting a defensive end or not spending significantly on a defensive end in free agency tells me that what they saw from Isiah Mcguire, now in his third year, won't turn 24 until July 27th. What a time to have a birthday, right? Dead center of training camp. But what the Browns' lack of moves at the defensive end position this offseason showed me is they believe that the year 1 to year 2 jump for Isiah Mcguire, where he ended up, I think, with a PFF grade over 85, one of the highest, I think it was the top 5 highest graded defensive ends as far as run defense in the entire NFL. That's impressive to do at 23 years old. That's usually the part that comes later in your career, is the handling of run defense. I believe the Cleveland Browns think that there is going to be another jump within Isiah Mcguire from year 2 to year 3. They didn't tell us this, but sometimes your actions tell us what we should think we should see, know, hear. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Mcguire is going to be this guy now who all of a sudden we're going to talk about, north of 10 sacks. It'd be nice, but I don't think necessarily that is the way this is going to work out with Isiah Mcguire. Even if you said it was north of 7.5, and he continues to be able to play the run like he showed in year 2. Now that is a significant jump. That he gets to a sack total of that number, we're now definitely talking about Isiah Mcguire having a future in Cleveland, signing an extension with the Cleveland Browns. Only thing that is kind of holding Isiah Mcguire back, in my opinion, his overall athleticism, as far as it was tested, you usually want to gamble on the upper athletes and you kind of ignore maybe the weaknesses in their game and say, oh, well, we can change that. We can't change the athleticism. But Isiah Mcguire during the combine and during his draft process was rocking pretty close to 270 pounds. I believe at the combine he was 267. Recent photos of him, recent interviews, whether it was Andrew Siciliano or, seeing, still photos of him at OTA's mandatory training camp. I don't believe Isiah Mcguire is necessarily 267 anymore, or if he is still around that weight number, it's a much better physical body type at that number than it was going back to the end of Missouri, the draft process, probably his rookie year as well. Also, what that shows me is that Isiah Mcguire is not afraid of the work. Isiah Mcguire wants to be great. And I think the Cleveland Browns really have a ton of faith in Isiah Mcguire. And I really think that they think here is a player, and I've talked about this before. There are 3 players for the Cleveland Browns in their 3rd year who could really go from, guys that are on the roster, contributed, to guys that can maybe start to be difference makers. Obviously, Isiah Mcguire is one of them. Cedric Tillman is 2. And the third one, of course, could be Juwon Jones. All from the same draft class, all drafted round 3 or later. So everybody wants to poo-poo these Andrew Berry's drafts. He very well could have 3 third-year players starting at premium positions that weren't drafted until round 3. And, of course, that's Tillman, that is Juwon Jones, and, of course, that is Isiah Mcguire. The Browns believe there's a breakout in Isiah Mcguire. You have to believe that they think that. Alex Wright is always a player that I've liked. I've always really been impressed with Alex Wright. Even going back to UAB, he was just the best defensive lineman they had. And it probably didn't necessarily help Alex Wright at the time because, if they thought the best matchup was to have Alex Wright play on the interior, they put him on the interior. If they thought the best matchup for Alex Wright was to play on the exterior, that's where they played him. It didn't maybe do Alex Wright any favors as far as becoming a player that could essentially dominate from one spot. He's a D end. That's his body type. He doesn't carry enough weight to play on the interior. Can he play on the interior and nickel and dime? Yes, he can. We saw that at UAB, and we certainly saw that here with the Cleveland Browns. For Alex, this is a contract year. Things go really well for Alex Wright. His time with the Cleveland Browns are probably over because somebody's probably going to maybe pay him more than the Cleveland Browns are willing to. If he doesn't play very well, it's not going to be here anyway, right? But, there's been times where Alex Wright has been really, really sound. And if the Browns defense can get back to their 2023 form, you're going to get the opportunity for these guys to look better as pass rushers, get more pass rushing opportunity, get better with their pass rush opportunities, their skills, all of that. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and it still feels weird to say that Shoyinka at the end. He was Joe Tryon at Washington. He'll always be Joe Tryon to me. Was a player I enjoyed at UW. I don't think Tampa Bay necessarily did him any favors because, with Vita Vea there, they kind of were playing more of the odd front, which meant Joe Tryon was maybe, basically playing more stand-up than he was hand in the dirt, which wasn't necessarily the best use of his skill set. I think as the years went on in Tampa, I think Joe Tryon-Shoyinka blended in better and, got himself acclimated a little bit better. But he's going to get an opportunity here with the Cleveland Browns to certainly be more hand in the dirt. He is a guy that certainly can line up on the outside. You could kick Myles inside. You could kick Myles inside and Alex Wright on the inside and have Mcguire and Myles and Alex Wright and Joe Tryon all in a NASCAR package if that's something you want to do. I think it was Joe Tryon the second he was signed. Basically what it told me is Joe Tryon in, Agba Okoronkwo out. And that is the way it unfortunately ultimately played out for Agbo. Certainly, some other names here. Cam Thomas, a former 3rd-round pick of the Arizona Cardinals, a guy we liked back in the day a ton, Pete Smith and myself from out of San Diego State. Got to play a little bit last year, certainly with Cleveland after he was released. Certainly a strong contender to lock down this 5th defensive end position. Julian Okworo, another guy kind of in a similar path, I would say, as Thomas. It really didn't work out in the first stop and trying to ultimately find his way in the NFL. Aiden Huntington is just fun. He's such a tweener. He's probably a big linebacker more than he's a defensive end, but he's quick, plays hard. He's got an old 1980s Toyota motor. He will not die. He will not stop. He just goes. May not make the final 53, but in my opinion, a guy like Aiden Huntington is an absolute perfect practice squad candidate because if the time comes where you need to bump him up to the 53, he's going to give you everything he got. Everything. He's just not going to stop. Ellerson Smith played sparingly for them last year. Nice body type, long. I kind of liked him a little bit. When they did kind of let him go, I thought that maybe it was a mistake at the time. This was a player that maybe you could have developed. Luckily for them, they were able to get him back. This defensive end unit, I really like where it is because I think we know with Myles and Isiah Mcguire, you have a future probably for a couple of years because again, I think Isiah Mcguire is playing himself into contention with a contract extension here for Cleveland. Alex Wright, if he balls out and goes, God bless him. And, Tryon, I think should fit in well. And I think anybody that comes here to play in that defensive end room, it's kind of hard not to get excited, get out there and run after and chase down quarterbacks with Myles because, everybody's attention is going to be on Myles. And all you got to do is win a one-on-one. But that battle for the fifth defensive end spot should be interesting. Now, defensive tackle, and, this is, again, what I'm talking about. There were players that were brought in and we're older. Dalvin Tomlinson, certainly. Shelby Harris still here, one of them. But what I wanted was some commitment to a group that could conceivably be here, blend together, and stay together for multiple seasons, 3, 4, 5, not just one and done or maybe two. Mason Graham is obviously the best in show here, and he is obviously what everybody's going to be looking forward to once training camp begins for Cleveland. It was kind of the pick because everybody spent so much time talking about Travis Hunter and Andre Carter. He was kind of the pick that nobody necessarily saw coming. But, the thing with Graham is just going to be hopefully the uptick as a pass rusher. His game is good, wrestling background. He's athletic. He's great with leverage. Really, really smart, young, and developed player for his age. Only thing you're waiting for is certainly the pass rush side to come. I don't think the Browns necessarily need it to come right away. I also don't think the Browns are going to have any issues if it does develop and come quicker or right away even. Malik Collins, and the thought process certainly was, to get somebody that can rush the interior from the interior. And that has kind of been Collins' calling card here in the NFL. He's not necessarily the guy you want on the field on 1st and 10, but he's certainly the guy you want on the field probably, in a 3rd and 8 scenario coming from the inside. He's been very effective as an interior pass rusher the last few years. And also can be here for the other guys to watch and maybe learn, pick his brain a little bit about pass rushing from the interior. Because although you're going against bigger, stronger, and I mean strong dudes, talking about guards and centers, if, it's easier to it's easier to beat them. You have a shorter path to the quarterback. Only thing is you have to be smart, decisive with your pass rush arsenal to get past these 325-pound, just absolute anchors that play on the interior line in the NFL. We'll find out more. Most likely, we probably won't hear till Tuesday till the report at just exactly where Mike Hall is in his recovery. As we all know, it was a pretty bad injury. Final game of the season in Baltimore. But Mike now in year 2. And, hopefully, there won't be much medical rust on him because Mike Hall was really kind of starting to hit the groove before that injury in Baltimore to end the 2024 season. I'm still infatuated with what I think Mike Hall can do because I think he's kind of the reverse of Mason Graham, where Mike is such an impressive guy as far as the interior pass rush presence. I also think that is something that can develop to be pass rushing on the outside against offensive tackles if that's something the Browns want to pursue with Mike Hall. He did have that type of athleticism. Certainly something that I'm, kind of intrigued. But, you can say Graham, you can say Hall, you can say Briggs, you can say Garrett, you can say Mcguire. That's 5. That's 5 defensive line players that could conceivably have a nice 4, maybe 5 season run here with the Browns. Yeah, you'll rotate in a guy or 2 every year, but having that core is vital. You look at the good teams in this league and having, it's usually that one star, a couple of good players around them on the defensive line, and then sprinkling in what you need. And each year may vary. Maybe, this year you needed some help on the edge. Maybe next year you needed a little more help on the interior. Shelby Harris is intriguing, and I think Shelby Harris is intriguing because if this goes well for the Browns defensive tackle group, it kind of means maybe Shelby Harris kind of comes the odd guy out. You just signed Collins. Graham's the rookie. Hall, Juwon Briggs, who I think is much better than anybody wants to talk about. All of a sudden, then Shelby Harris maybe becomes the odd guy out here. Maybe he's got to get, if, the defensive tackle group's playing really well in August, maybe Shelby Harris is possibly moved. Maybe Shelby Harris is possibly moved by the trade deadline. Because, again, if this all goes right for everybody else in that defensive tackle group, it's just by attrition that, Shelby Harris obviously becomes the odd guy out. Juwon Briggs, and again, it made no sense the way the Browns handled this last year, and I know he was just a 7th-round pick. But, had a bunch of injuries. I didn't know then what bringing Sam Kamara up was doing. No offense to Sam Kamara, who's still here with the Browns. I just felt Juwon Briggs was a better player in college, and I felt the Browns had a commitment to him. They might as well get the kid out there and see what they had in him. And to his credit, he played well. Played very well. And was, one of the few bright spots in what was an otherwise dark year for the Cleveland Browns. But ideally, the way it works for them is it's, Mason Graham. It's obviously Malik Collins. It's Mike Hall. It's Juwon Briggs. It's, basically your top 4 defensive tackles. Again, possibly leaving Shelby Harris in an awkward position. Probably eliminating an opportunity for Sam Kamara to hang around. Or Sean Holly, who again, this room looks pretty locked, sealed, dealed. Anyway, you want to slice it as far as the defensive tackle group. Ideally, you're going to keep 10 overall defensive linemen. So, of course, that would be Myles Garrett. That would be Isiah Mcguire. That would be Alex Wright. That would be Joe Tryon-Shanka. And just basing this on where they are now, I would say Cam Thomas makes the team over, Aquara, over Aiden Huntington and Ellerson Smith. So that's your 5. Same thing at the defensive tackle position. Mason Graham, certainly. Malik Collins, Mike Hall, Shelby Harris, and Juwon Briggs look like your 5 defensive tackles that are going to make this roster. So there's your 10. But again, for me, that 10, and then you get to that core, because you obviously have 4 more years that you have control over Mason Graham after 2025. Mike Hall, you have 2025, and then another 2 years. Juwon Briggs, it is 2025, and then possibly another year. Myles, we know, is here forever now, pretty much. Isiah Mcguire has this year and team control for next year. Alex Wright, a little bit of a tricky spot, is, he will be an impending free agent at the end of this year. Joe Tryon, only a 1-year deal. So certainly DN looks like it could maybe use a little help, probably somewhere in 2026, some way, shape, or form, free agency, trade, draft, something the Browns are certainly going to consider. But for me, and my excitement level here is it feels like there is a future here right now. You know what I'm saying? There is a today and there is a tomorrow when it comes to the Cleveland Browns defensive line. And I think having that defensive line, which is such a key to a Jim Schwartz defense, where you want to give your corners the ability to play one-on-one and hopefully create turnovers, you need the defensive line commensurate to that theory, to that belief. And I think it's starting to look like that for the Cleveland Browns and these guys that they have. I think Isiah Mcguire is probably going to be your breakout player for the Cleveland Browns this year on defense. I truly do. And I think the Cleveland Browns think that, and that's basically why there was a lot of talk about, Abdul Carter and these things. And I'm not saying, they chose McGuire over Carter. I think they just felt confident enough that they could add to the defensive line somewhere else because what they think that McGuire can give them. But Isiah Mcguire, you want to tell me it's going to be a breakout year? You want to tell me Isiah Mcguire is going to find a way to beat a number of 7.5 sacks? And you're going to be able to pair that with his run defensive ability? Yes, I think Isiah Mcguire is going to let everybody know in 2025 just what a value pick he was in the 4th round of the 2023 NFL Draft. As always, we appreciate all of the supporters here for the OBR, whether you're coming out every day for the written content, whether you have that insider package and you can wow your friends with some of the latest Cleveland Browns news that not everybody has access to. So again, make sure it's time, guys. Training camp's about to start. Now is the time to get that subscriber package. I'm telling you. Everybody that comes out every night to the OBR streaming network, beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, Browns 3D, hosted by myself, Jeff Lloyd, then followed every night with different content for you. Today being Tuesday, you will get Brad Ward and Pete Smith with the React. And Brad does a great job of basically serving up these lovely meatballs for Pete Smith to smash out the park. And then at 9 o'clock, make sure you're sticking around. Garage Beers with Mike Keefe. Very, very special episode. Head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets will join Mike this evening on the Garage Beers podcast. So I believe Mike's line is get your beers ready. Well, get your beers indeed ready. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure, of course, that you're subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. This has been your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network, and we will talk to y'all tomorrow.